Well, hey again, Mr. Bleeker here. At this point in the excretory system, we have to look at the kidneys and focus on them as organs that use an ultrafiltration process to get rid of waste products, but then use a separate process to retrieve some of the products that they filtered out, some things that really shouldn't have been lost. We're going to examine that now. So I'm going to sneak back into our notes from last day. Okay, so there we go. Now, when we began our study of the excretory system, one of the things that I said was that, just draw a cute heart here, that your blood is pumped down. Now, it's coming from the left side of your heart. We'll concentrate on more on that later. If we come down the descending aorta, one of the things that is done is that the descending aorta will send its blood downwards, and one of the major vessels is the renal artery right here. So I'm just sort of drawing a little line off that descending aorta, DA. Now this blood is very oxygenated. It just came from the lungs. If you know your respiratory system, that's factually correct. One thing you might not have thought of is it's very polluted. Just because it's high in oxygen doesn't mean it's not high in waste products like urea and creatinine and things like that. So this highly oxygenated but really polluted blood has got to go to the kidneys for some filtration. And when that blood comes back, when sort of all is said and done, when that blood comes out here through the renal vein, it might be low in oxygen because it's given away all of its oxygen to the cells of the kidney, and that's good. The kidney needs oxygen too. But the blood is squeaky clean. This is the cleanest blood in the body. And it's going to take a trip now on its way back to the heart um, for a recharge to get some oxygen again, and that cycle carries on and on. But the kidney, what I'm trying to make here is that the kidney is an ultrafiltration organ. Now, how can it take all that pressure and not explode? Well, you might have raging rivers. The descending aorta is definitely an extreme amount of pressure. You would never want it to be pierced. You would bleed out in minutes, if not in seconds. The descending aorta itself might be under intense pressure, but it's distributing that pressure when you enter the kidney over many streams. Each of these little blood vessels in the kidneys decrease that pressure to the point where it's sort of an analogy. You're not walking on a bed of nails. Now it's like you're lying on a bed of nails, distributing pressure over a greater surface area. That's a little trick we learned about in grade 8 science. So the kidney itself, you'd kind of be surprised to know just how many of these little streams, these little pressure relievers, there are. And there's about 1 million of these things called nephrons in your kidney. We're going to look at these little ultrafiltration sort of units. But they don't just do filtration. Okay, that's filtration is job one. So I'm going to turn this bullet point into a numerical point. Sure, there's filtration. We've got to get the waste products out. But sometimes when you push waste products out, what can happen? Just a sec here. I just want to. Okay. There we go. You push waste products out, but you also push some things out that weren't waste products. And it's pretty important. You need to get some of them back. You might know them. Water, salt, um, let's just put a couple more in here. Water, salt, glucose, the primary fuel that we run off of. Amino acids. Yeah, we need to get some of those back too. So the second job of the basic unit of the kidney, the nephron, okay, nephrons, kidneys are made up of millions of them, is to reabsorb. The third job is that kidneys themselves can also secrete. If you've taken antibiotics, you have to keep taking them because your kidneys will keep eliminating them from your bloodstream. Now you'll probably say, wait a minute. I thought my liver was a filtration organ. That's true. It is, but it's not the only one in the body. You might have heard a family member tell you this before, that Tylenol is really hard on the liver, right? Don't take too much of that acetaminophen compound. Okay, there's another painkiller, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, to be exact, known as ibuprofen. Commercially, Advil. You might have heard of that. Your kidneys will get rid of ibuprofen at a very quick rate, which is why if you're in pain, you'll have to take ibuprofen again because your kidneys are eliminating it just like they're eliminating things like antibiotics. So secretion, you can think of it as extra waste. Ooh, come on, stylus. I need a new stylus. Extra waste disposal. There we go. It's always better for cursive. And so you've got filtering your kidneys and their tissues will be reabsorbing things, and then they'll also be doing a little extra um, secretion to get rid of a few things that sort of last chance to get out of the body. After all, when urine leaves the kidneys, it's eliminated from the body, so it's a great place to get rid of products that really aren't very good for you. So there's some major anatomy here that you must know. Warning, know the upcoming diagram. Bowman's capsule, where the filtering occurs. There we go. The glomerulus is part of that. Now, the nephron isn't just a tube. There's sort of stops of call along the tube. So you'll have to know about the first sort of port of call, the proximal convoluted part of the tube, the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted portion of the nephron, the DCT, and the collecting duct, which is really the last stage where urine is forming and is headed out to the ureter. So there's a lot to know. So there's a whole bunch of text here that I'm going to flee from right now because I've got some animations. I really need to lead you through the picture of this, and you really need to understand kind of what you're looking at. So I'm going to turn off AirPlay for just a moment. Yeah, I say that, but it'll be longer, won't it? Okay, and I'll just go to my computer now. Excellent. Okay, just making sure my recording's going okay there. I had a full length recording fail. It was great fun. So this is actually take two. Okay, let's go back to, there we go. Sort of phase one. Um, Kidney facts. So here is your descending aorta plumbing into the kidney here, and that blood is going for filtration. Now, when you go in there, that is known as the renal artery. Okay, the renal system, kidney, renal, you want to know it. When the blood has been filtered, it goes back through this blue structure that's going underneath here, and that is um, that's your vena cava. Now, to be precise, your vena cava is this one is the inferior trunk of the vena cava. It's inferior because it's below the heart. It's leading up from the bottom of the body. And if you look over here, you'll see your other kidney with its renal artery and its renal vein. There you go. Leading down from the kidney, here's your ureter into the bladder for elimination out the urethra. So your kidneys don't get a day off. 24 hours, 7 days a week, they're cleaning blood. Every day, 50 gallons are filtered through this thing. You can see why it's so important. It's not that we couldn't live without our kidneys. We could, but then we'd have to have something that would filter our blood, and that's a tall order. Another view here, you can see the kidney forming, and if you look here, you see the renal artery, and as you go into all these little sort of distribution networks here, you're looking at arterioles. An artery is a bigger tube, and a way to remember it is as the artery gets smaller, we give it a name that sounds longer. I know it's ironic. Um, it's called an arteriole. So that's all these little guys right here. The filtration goes on here, and well, technically in here, but I'm going to zoom in on that later. When the filtration occurs, your waste product will come down from the what are called the collecting ducts into this pelvis, and that's urine elimination right there. All right, I'm going to leave that one now and restart this one. This is a great little animation called How Do Kidneys Work? And I like it on several levels. One, because it has a really nice simple visualization that'll sort of lead us into our discussion of all the parts that we have to know. So again, here's your oxygenated but filthy blood coming into your kidneys. And we'll zoom in on a kidney and take a peek. So if we go even further, there we go. We get into this thing called the nephron. You're looking at it here, where the blood comes in, and there's what we call ultrafiltration right here, and the waste products right here. When the blood hits, it's under extreme amount of pressure, and the waste products are pushed through to the other side. So this right here, this knot of blood vessels is known as the glomerular knot or the glomerulus. So that pressure will push all sorts of stuff out. But the problem is you push out things you didn't want. Now, recall that you want to get rid of things like creatinine and urea and ammonia. Large molecules not so good for the body. Well, if you look here at this crescent shaped thing, it almost looks like a catcher's mitt. And that's called Bowman's capsule. And what Bowman's capsule does, or the capsule of the nephron, is it catches the waste products and down you go into this tube. And you see this is going to lead around down eventually to the collecting ducts, to the ureters, and out to the bladder. But the real important point, sort of in this first visualization, is this part right here. This is filtration. This is step one. So you want to make sure you know it. Filtration itself only takes little products. Now, notice that I said urine, or sorry, rather, urea, creatinine, small things. Do you notice that these little sort of white objects are meant to represent something? Well, think of those as representing your red blood cells or your white blood cells or even your platelets. You're not supposed to lose those. There should be no blood in the urine because no blood should get in here. If it does, then there's a problem with this tissue right here. Now, if you've ever had kidney meat, you'll notice you would have observed that it's very, very salty. And kidney tissue is kind of interesting. It's salty for a reason. The saltier you make it, the better chance you have of reabsorbing water. And it's a trick. Salty kidneys are great are great water magnets. It's a bit of an analogy, so you have to bear with me. As you plunge deeper into the kidney, it becomes saltier and saltier. And there's a little trick there. You can see this sort of animation here. What we're trying to set up is what we call an osmotic gradient, or a pull that's so irresistible to water that we can pull water out. And what's not being shown is that at this point, water can be intercepted and returned to your bloodstream. So it's a pretty interesting little salt trick that goes on down here. So this right here is the ultrafiltration portion where the waste products, and now we're seeing a little bit more, the waste products are showing up. So you'll see wastes, we've already mentioned them, but what I didn't mention is some little things in the blood that are kind of too good to be true that get pushed through. You don't just lose ammonia, you don't just lose urea, you lose water because that's tiny and it'll get pushed through. You lose glucose, you lose precious salt, and if that stuff is in the tube, you had better have a game plan to get it back because these are nutrients that can be hard to come by in the animal kingdom, or living on this planet for that matter. And our kidney tissue is designed smartly enough to get it back. And it's not just this region here where we reabsorb water. There's some opportunities to reabsorb up here too. So that's going to be our first sort of area of focus. All right. So I'm going to just reload this site here. And got a nice visualization here. Oh, wait. Hold on. Hold that thought. This brown region is called the cortex. Now that's sort of the top region of the kidney. It's part of the filtration process. Um, a portion of the nephron runs through here, but this is also an area that can secrete hormones that can have effects on our blood pressure. So this, we're going to come back to this later, talking about how it's not just a filtration organ, but it's an endocrine organ. So didn't want to lose that thought. Now we'll zoom in, move through the intro, and there we go. I love this animation on so many levels. I'll tell you why. Here is your arteriole leading into basically the filter. This is the glomerular knot, and what's surrounding it right here, you can see Bowman's capsule, right? So here's the story. You have blood that needs to be cleaned, and it enters and it gets squeezed very hard, and that pushes material right through. That's like a screening process, right? And the waste products, sure, they'll enter here into the tubule of the nephron, but there's some names we have to know about. Now, as that blood is pushed in here, right, this sort of clot, well, not a clot, it's basically a collection of capillaries where it's pushed on so tightly that materials will flow through. This is called the afferent arteriole. Now, I want you to remember that. It's very important. Afferent starts with the letter A. Okay? The arteriole that leads out is known as the efferent arteriole. And it doesn't just leave, it doesn't just take off. In fact, you're going to notice that it's not shown here, but these blood vessels will they'll take a little trip around here, and they'll see what they can collect. I'll just keep it that general. You could see them really close to this tubule because it's their job, and there's way more branches of it than you see here, at collecting materials that were lost. Because there's some stuff in the filtrate that we shouldn't have lost. Let's look at an example here. Let's see here. I think I have to go to the... There we go. I have to go to the nephron to do it. Sorry, I haven't used that animation in a little bit. So the blood flows in. And this is a really good animation. And I'll tell you why. Because large things like this, you'll see them just bounce off. This big protein does not get pushed through the capillary lining, the little blood knot. It's too tight. But some things will get pushed through. And I can see water right there. I can see sodium got pushed through. Glucose. Whoa, glucose. That's not good. We shouldn't have glucose in our urine, right? No. In fact, there's a strategy for getting this back. Urea, that is something that we want to get rid of, so that's a waste product. But I see some really good stuff here that I want to get back. So when we think about it, as they pass through here, they've entered into the tube of the nephron, and it's time for a little bit of processing. We have to get some stuff back. Let's see here. I just wanted to come back to our animation. So this can be called a renal capsule, It's also been called a renal corpuscle, and you'll actually get a chance to look at these things. They're interesting. They look like little brains under scanning electron micrographs. As the waste products have been ultra filtered through here, we need to focus in on what's called the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, everybody gets kind of confused by the term convoluted, so I'll give you a definition. Convoluted means folded, back and forth, very wavy. Okay, so I get it. It's the tube of the nephron that's got lots of folds in it, but why do you call it proximal? Because it's close to the beginning of the journey. It's proximal to the glomerulus, to the renal capsule, this whole structure here. And it's got its own job to do because really great products like glucose, water, sodium, and although it's not telling you here, there are some amino acids that got squeezed through here too that the body really doesn't want to lose. So we'll go there. I want to show you what's going on here. This, if we go back, if you think of this tube right here, as you're taking a trip through this, there's going to be some pumping going on. And by pumping, what I mean is going to happen is we'll get some water to sneak across, and we'll get it back into the blood vessels that are nearby. So there's little gates. Now, if notice when I go over that animation, you can see that water can travel through these little gates. They open right up, and water makes it back into your blood. That's good. We squeezed water through in the filtrate, so this is a chance to get it back. But what's going on over here? What are we getting back here? Well, this is a neat little piece of machinery that's in the membrane of the tube, and using a little bit of energy, we can pump glucose and we can pump sodium and get it back to the blood. So that's kind of cool. So basically just think of this as a glucose and sodium pump. All right, that's neat. Come down here. I mentioned this one because you notice it's a little different. This one was pumping glucose, but this one, as soon as glucose touches it, it just flips. And that's actually called facilitated diffusion. It's a fancy word. What it means is that little pump doesn't need any energy at all. As soon as glucose fits into it, it just whoop, flops, turns inside out, and sends glucose on its merry way into the bloodstream. So it's a neat little protein that helps to get the job done. There's other proteins. This one here is another pump using some ATP, you can see there. And this one is going to help pump sodium across the membrane to the other side. So what do we have? Urea just keeps going because it's a waste product and we're not going to help it get back into the bloodstream. We just filtered it. But water, we need water to make it across. Okay, we need it back. Glucose, we've got pumps of two varieties that'll get it across. Great. Protein, green, they're not showing it go by. Protein itself is too big. We might be able to pump some amino acids across, but not protein, way too big. And sodium, we've got a pumping mechanism for that. So we're getting good stuff back into the capillaries that are right near this tube. So you have to look, that was this tube, and here are capillaries, really thin-walled, that you can get materials back with. That's great. So here we're getting back some water, we're getting back some glucose, some sodium, we're also getting back amino acids not being shown. Now notice, if you will, the part of the nephron. Now by nephron, you're talking about this here, the renal capsule, and this whole structure. You've got to follow the tube all the way around until you end up forming urine over here. If this whole structure is the nephron, then what's with this dotted line? Well, I'll tell you. The dotted line represents the cortex. Okay? This is the sort of non-salty region, the outer region of the kidney. In the previous animation, I showed it as a brown region. Down here, what we've got is the salty medulla. And this is salty down here because what it does is it it sets up a salt gradient, and water is irresistibly kind of pulled. Sorry, I should show it from here. Is pulled out of the loop of Henle and gets caught. See right here, water keeps getting intercepted by the blood vessels. It gets reabsorbed, and that's good because that's how we get water back into our circulatory system. But there's a little bit to talk about with this. So I like to think of this as a carnival ride. You get the filtration happens here, and you get to the proximal convoluted tubule, and you get back the good stuff that you shouldn't have lost. Okay, but you have to know what that stuff is. You have to be very specific. Right now, I'm just saying good stuff, but I've already outlined that as being glucose and water and sodium and amino acids. Once you take this carnival ride here and you plunge, woo, down you go, this big death drop here into the medulla, this itself is called the loop of Henle. Now, you might see it in your book called the loop of the nephron. That's fine. That's just a sort of a generic way of naming it. The whole point of the loop of Henle, and I'll zoom in on it here, is to con water across the membrane of the tube. And that's the reason water wants out is because this whole region out here is so salty. Now, as you recall, when we talked about water, it's a dipole. So its positive ends, the hydrogens, are very attracted to chlorine that it'll find out here, and oxygen, right, in water is very attracted to sodium. So if you think of sodium chloride floating around out here, water finds that molecule completely irresistible and will travel across the membrane and get intercepted by the blood vessels. So here we go. Nab it quick. Put it back in the blood vessels. It's out. But what's this? What's going on over here? Like, I sense that water gets out through this side. This is permeable to water. Now this side, there's no water coming out over here. What the heck is that? Well, the whole reason kidneys are salty in the first place is because this side of the loop of Henle, and now we should identify the sides very specifically. This is descending. You can see it's descending, right? This is called ascending, or going up like this. The descending loop is where water gets reabsorbed. The ascending loop, this side, is the reason for that. If you notice this blue right here, that's sodium. This side pumps out sodium. Think of it as pumping out salt. That's a good general sort of analogy here. And that makes the medulla of the basically of the kidney extremely salty. And it's the reason water on this side is leaving, because this side is making the whole place so super salty that there's a massive osmotic gradient and water will just follow it. And that's when you can nab it. So the loop of Henle is all about water reabsorption because this side makes everything so darn salty. There you go. True story. You learned it here. So we get reabsorption here. Actually, let's back up. We get filtration here. We get back some material here. So this is reabsorption. We have some more reabsorption here. And then we come around to the last kind of, I think like I'm on a roller coaster and I'm sort of hitting this crazy second loop-de-loop. Well, as soon as I see this, I'm like, hey, that's convoluted. Oh, it's the distal convoluted tubule. We know it as the DCT. Long and short of that, it's distant from the beginning of the journey. So the renal capsule, renal corpuscle over here, is proximal here. Okay, so we get it. So that's why we call that the proximal convoluted tubule. But over here, this is the distal convoluted tubule. So we're just about done the journey. I mean, this is the right here. This is when the urine's going to plunge out. It's leaving. It's history. So what happens at the distal convoluted tubule? Well, when you look at the distal convoluted tubule, actually, you know what? I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to come back And I'll show you this animation. It's just a different way of looking at it, but if I go to D here, which is the distal tubule, what you could focus on here is that this is a time when you're just about to head for the collecting duct and finish your journey. This is a great time where the body could pump waste products and have them eliminated. You could literally just pump all sorts of things here. And what happens, what gets pumped out here, it's not just ammonia ions that are going to get pumped in there. You'll see hydrogen ions are going to get pumped in there. But antibiotics, ibuprofen, this is a great time to get rid of what you don't want because urine forms and is collected right here and eliminated from the body. So at this point, I'm just going to minimize my browser there. Make sure I'm still recording. Nothing like losing half an hour of recording, folks. It's okay. I'm an understanding person. Let's see here. Come back to... yeah, I will just have to get AirPlay back on. Go back to our notes for a second. So grab your notes. And we were looking at this right here. Okay, so I'll give you a moment to write down this, and then I'll just get into a few more of the details that I was just after there. But the glomerulus, when we look at the nephron, you have to know all these parts. It's a capillary knot where that filtration occurs. So it's really the first part of the nephron. But when you get into the renal tubule, which is actually like, it's quite amazing that it's 2 inches long because it's so tiny that it would be hard to pull out of kidney tissue. You can't even see it, it's so small. But the glomerulus filtrate is caught by Bowman's capsule. Bowman's capsule is just, think of it as just waiting on the other side. And it just leads into the tubule. See if I can find my stylus here, do that a little bit better. And it's up very high. If you look at Bowman's capsule, it's up in towards the surface of the kidney in something that we call the cortex. And you will be asked that so that you know what region it's in. So make a note that Bowman's capsule is in the cortex, just like the glomerulus. They're right together. The proximal convoluted tubule, it's still up in the cortex. You haven't taken the plunge yet into the salty medulla. And of course, that's all about reabsorbing nutrients, sodium, water, glucose, etc. But we'll summarize that more. Henle's loop, which is that turn, that plunge into the medulla, that salty sort of brine bath medulla. And that's all about getting water back. That's really what that's about. And the last one that we really haven't had enough time to talk about is the distant wavy part of the tube, the distal convoluted tubule, which has, it's quite high in mitochondria because you're pumping all sorts of waste products into the tubule at that point, just to make sure you eliminate them from the body. And the distal convoluted tubule is in the cortex. So when you look at when you look at all these structures, an easy way to think about this is there's really one thing that's in the medulla. Actually, technically two. As far as the renal tubule, only Henle's loop is in the medulla. That's pretty well it. Henle's loop, and then when you're done and the urine is leaving the kidney, the collecting duct is the last sort of portion that's still in the medulla. Full of waste products, and they're on their way to the bladder. Via the ureters, that is. I'm going to use my pen. I'm going to make a blue line here and point out sort of the border between the salty medulla and the not so salty cortex. And that really clarifies it, right? Here's where the filtration goes on at the renal capsule. And your proximal convoluted tubule, we call it the PCT, right, is this first wavy bend. which then plunges down to the loop of Henle, which is in the medulla, and that's where we get a lot of water reabsorption. And then when we come around here to the distal convoluted tubule, the DCT, that's really the last chance. If you think about it, urine is forming, and that's it. It's going to be gone. So this is a great place, the DCT, to pump any of the last waste products you can, because it's last stop for urine before it's gone. So here's a really good, well, it's directly from your text. It's the reason I put it in here. When you look at the three things that go on in basically in the nephron, you've got filtration at the glomerulus, okay, and that's there we go. That's down there. But when that filtration goes on, you're going to notice a few products you did not want to get rid of. I mean, you obviously didn't want to get rid of red blood cells or white blood cells or anything. They can't get into the filtrate. They're too big. But on Bowman's, when you go past Bowman's capsule, you notice that some things were lost. Water, glucose, amino acids, and salts. Those are the very things that you're going to get back sort of in phase 2 in the tubule, which is the reabsorption. So you could get water back, glucose. We already saw some pumping mechanisms for this. Some are just, they're basically little proteins in the membrane that help move things around. You can also get back your amino acids and a few of your salts. Notice where they're being intercepted. You can see these blood vessels right here. And it's their job to intercept these materials that are coming out of the tube, that are pumped out of the tube, and that's precisely what they do. If you come down to the loop of Henle down here, you'll see a lot of blood vessels, and that's because you're reabsorbing water, right? Capture that water as it comes out, get it back into the bloodstream. That's a pretty good plan. Makes sense. But as you come along here, and you've got your waste products, your creatinine, and you've got your well, creatinine, which is a muscle waste. I referred to that before, but I wanted to clarify. You've got your urea, you've got your uric acid. This is the secretion phase. I'll just highlight that now. There we go. Tubular secretion. And they're saying, they're just being quite generic. There we go. By saying drugs. But by drugs, what they could mean is, well, what they do mean is antibiotics, and ibuprofen, known as in most circles as Advil, for example, for its commercial version. But you'll also notice hydrogen ions. And if you eliminate hydrogen ions, you've got to wonder what the blood's doing there. It's correcting for its pH. If the blood is too acidic, it's a good time to pump in hydrogen ions. And it's a little bit of homeostasis at work. And looking at the final waste products, zoom in here in the collecting duct, you've got a lot of things you wanted to get rid of. I'll add those hydrogen ions to the mix. So urine contains water, salt, basically nitrogen compounds that need to be eliminated from the blood, some muscle waste here, and hydrogen ions if necessary, and any drugs that the kidney was trying to eliminate. You've heard that ibuprofen is tough on the kidneys. Well, now you can actually tell someone why. It's hard on your kidneys because your body's got to pump it out at the distal convoluted tubule, and that can be pretty wearing, even damaging over time, right? Which is why you don't take any medication that you don't need to take. Okay, just gonna just make sure. I guess I'm just paranoid now. Um, there we go. Lost my last recording, so I'm double checking. When you look at making this window full screen, that's what I wanted. When you look at kidney tissue, this is a scanning electron micrograph, and if you look close, follow this line here, you can see the afferent arteriole that's leading into a glomerulus here and is being filtered, and you've got the efferent, or the leaving, right? E for exit, that's the way to remember it. You got the efferent arteriole right there. So it looks like a bunch of sort of like brains on branches, but that's what you're looking at. You're looking essentially at nephrons, and there's millions and millions of these in kidney tissue. I'm going to come back to this slide a little bit later. There's a lot to talk about, and it's in this area here. It's a very interesting conversation, an area of extreme pressure sensitivity. I'm going to come back to it. I'd love to speak to it right now. This slide's a little bit out of place, but I promise we'll come back. So what are we talking about? If we put it all together, what do we have in urine formation? Well, phase one, we've got high pressure filtration as the afferent arteriole leads in. And what we get are our filterable parts and our non-filterable parts. Okay, here's what's not filterable. I don't think you want blood in your urine. You don't want white blood cells in your urine. That should not be making it into the renal tubule. Platelets, these are things that need to stay in circulation. Proteins, well, they haven't been broken down yet, so let's not lose them. But the filterable parts, well, that's the small stuff. Water, nitrogen-based wastes, salts, glucose, amino acids. Some of that stuff needs to be returned, and we've already kind of talked about that a little bit. Reabsorbing, now particularly, okay, by selective reabsorption, we've got the proximal convoluted tubule, and we've got Henle's loop. So I'll just write Henle. See if I have room. I got to write Henle's loop. These are our reabsorbers, and each one kind of goes after different things. The proximal convoluted tubule is going to help return sodium chloride. So neat thing about reabsorbing sodium is that chlorine will just follow it, because they're sort of married at the hip, right? Positive, negative ions, they'll follow each other. And water just follows by osmosis. It'll basically follow salt at the proximal convoluted tubule. That's one way of sneaking it across. Water will just flow into concentrated regions, so you can count on it to go across. There are pumping mechanisms. There's a lot of mitochondria to help make sure that things that need to be pumped across, in some cases things like glucose, amino acids, you got to make sure that that stuff gets reabsorbed. If you find glucose in the urine, it really, as a medical practitioner, you'd be wondering what's going on. Is this person, is there a possibility of diabetes, where they're, let's say they're not reabsorbing glucose properly as they should. Now, there's two versions of diabetes, but I'll just say glucose shouldn't be showing up in your urine. Your body should be reabsorbing it. Or is there a problem with your reabsorption of glucose at the kidney level? So it kind of makes for an interesting sort of analysis. But reabsorption happens. Here's the thing you got to realize. Reabsorption happens because if you look at the inner tube of the renal tubule, it's very, very wavy. And what that does is sort of like carpeting. It makes it so that the surface area is maximized for reabsorbing materials back into the blood vessels that are right nearby, like that. And that continues down the tubule to allow so many chances for this reabsorption to happen. Water, salts, glucose, amino acids, you name it. Now, when we get to the end of the tube, it's very important. You're at the distal, come here, you're at the distal convoluted tubule. And you're pretty distant, right? You're kind of at the end of the nephron, pretty close. This is the time to get rid of your waste products. There's no more time. It pretty well has to happen now. So if your blood pH needs to be regulated, a good trick would be to pump, let's say if your blood was a little bit too acidic, pump hydrogen ions into urine and bring the pH back into the normal range, right? Get rid of some more creatinine, ammonia. If there's any drugs in your system, it's your DCT, which is rapidly eliminating them. So you'll have to take your penicillin until you're done the whole round of treatment. All this stuff ends up in urine. It's supposed to be lost, but there's things. If you look at our kidneys, now you're learning that they're an excretion organ, right? And you get what the waste products could look like, but they're also a reabsorption organ. They're very good at getting back precious commodities, water and salt and glucose and things like that at the proximal convoluted tubule. We don't want to lose the good stuff. We also don't want to forget our friend, the loop of Henle here, because the loop of Henle reabsorbs a ton of water. In fact, that's its modus operandi. That is what it does. Here we go. So got a neat little graphic right here. The loop of Henle goes down into the really salty region, and water flows out through the descending limb because it's so salty here, extremely salty. And we know that the reason it's salty is because the ascending limb is releasing a ton of salt, secreting it, just to get all of this water back out of that little tube. That's really the story. I'll just give you a second to write a few notes here. There's a mention of a term right here, hypertonic, and you could say that the fluid that is in the tubule, as it's now heading for the collecting ducts, it's losing water and it's getting waste products added to it. It's having good stuff taken away from it. It's being purified as a waste substance. It's extremely concentrated, so we refer to it as a sort of a hypertonic solution. That's what happens when you eliminate the water. It just becomes more and more concentrated. Okay, again, here's your graph, and I would just say, know it for the test. The filtration, the reabsorption, and the secretion parts. Right? You want to know. Literally, I'll just write these sections for you to take a look at. The final product of urine, really, what you should have is what the body doesn't need. So take time, make sure you really read over this section quite well, and know what's being reabsorbed and know what's being secreted. The PCT and the DCT are huge players in the functioning of the nephron. Okay, so photocopy this one directly into your brain, but you have to know who's doing what. The glomerulus is doing the filtration, right? The reabsorption is happening at the PCT and Henle's loop down here. And secretion is happening over here. Now you notice the blood vessels here, right? You can see how they're everywhere. They're just absolutely all around the nephron. Well, it's their job to intercept things that need to be reabsorbed from the tube. So what we say is these capillaries that are all around the tube are known as peritubular capillaries. And the name is what it says, the capillaries that are all around the tube for the purpose of reabsorption. At the distal convoluted tubule, though, I should make a point of order. If you focus in right there, you could see that the secretion of waste products is out of the blood and into the tube. Let's zoom in on that, folks. Ah, look at that. The capillaries are pumping these waste products across. This one in particular is being done to correct the pH of your blood. Sounds kind of important, doesn't it? This one is being done to get rid of waste products that are in your blood that could be toxic. Your body's just trying to eliminate what shouldn't naturally be there. Okay. Little point here about your blood pH. pH should be around neutral, right? But it's not. So I think that what I'll focus on for the purpose of a grade 12 lecture is that let's focus on hydrogen ion excretions. So if the blood's too acidic, pump more hydrogen. But if the blood is more basic, less hydrogen. I'll kind of keep it that simple because there's other ways of looking at this, but for the purpose of this grade 12 course, I think you get the idea that based on the acid and base theory that you've done through to grade 12, usually with chemistry, the more hydrogen ions excreted, the more basic your blood will become. It's basically a negative feedback loop, similar to what we've studied in the course. Okay, at this point, we've really talked about all the parts of the nephron, right? Starting with filtration of the glomerulus. Let's back up a little bit. Here we go. Filtration of the glomerulus over here. And we've looked at reabsorption in the proximal region and at the loop of Henle, right down there. And then we've looked at secretion at the distal convoluted tubule to form urine down here. And this is what our waste products in urine should literally be. That's good. But I did mention that the kidneys were also an endocrine organ. Now, endocrine, you'll hear that and you'll think, well, what the heck do you mean, endocrine organ? Oh, one of those organs that has to do with hormones and the regulation of hormones in the body for homeostasis. Absolutely. So there's another lecture here where I have to focus in on how hormones can be secreted by the exterior of the kidney. A lot of those have to do with maintaining your blood pressure, right? But there's other hormones that'll affect the inside of kidney. The outside is the cortex, the inside is the medulla. So there's some interesting action that can happen here that'll form the basis of my next lesson. But I'm just glad this one didn't get lost by my recording software. So that's it. Thanks again, folks, and have a good one. Ciao, and we'll see you for the next lecture soon enough.